So welcome to the node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for November 9th, 2022. We'll follow the agenda as was tagged in the issue in the TSC repo, which was issue number 1304. Before we get started, does anybody have any announcements they'd like to share? Okay, no announcements this week. I guess in terms of CPC and board meeting updates, Rich, I don't know if you have anything on the CPC side of things.
No, we had a meeting yesterday. It was good. We talked about a lot, but nothing jumped out at me as something that the TSC needed to be informed about. Although obviously feel free to check out the CPC repo for the agendas and minutes and recordings and stuff.
Yeah, I guess if anybody takes a look there and has questions, they can always then reach out to you. So, okay, so let's move on to then the issues tagged for the agenda. The first one is number 45345, which is request for large runners on GitHub CI. Just opening that up. If anybody has context, please jump in.
So Yagi's added the, and I hope I'm not completely destroying his name, added that. And you commented on it, and yeah, I mean, I think actually I think what happened there is I asked him to put the build agenda label on it, and the build agenda label didn't exist, so he came back and said I did TSC agenda instead, and I just left it. But I created a build agenda label. But it's good to have information, you know, like the GitHub CI jobs do take a long time, 2 hours to run for the Mac OS tests and things like that. So anything we can do to, get bigger machines and have more efficient tests, would be a good thing. And you can see that Tierney left a comment saying, he can follow up again, but doesn't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I guess there's like a technical issue, right? So, so I took a note, said should be discussed in the build team taking off the TSC agenda. Does that make sense?
So the build, I'll try to be there for that build meeting. I usually miss it, but real quick, the thing that it might be good to invite Yagas to that meeting actually to talk about it. But because I think what he wants to propose is that we rely more on the GitHub CI and less on the Jenkins CI for, obviously we need Jenkins CI for things like AIX and SmartOS and other things. But for things like Mac and whatnot, that maybe we don't, we don't, especially because he was having PR stalled by problems with the Mac OS, the running out of space issue that we saw over the weekend. But of course, a lot of the stuff in Jenkins is tied to our releases and stuff. I bet Danielle or Beth could talk about that if we want to talk about it right now. But it's tied to release processes, and like I don't know that we probably have to use Jenkins to build a Mac binary, for example, and therefore it makes a lot of sense to make sure the tests pass there all the time rather than freaking out at a release when you run the test finally and like everything fails. So that's just context for something we're not going to talk about here. Sorry, everybody.
Yeah, I think just adding to that is I'm not sure the test runners give us the sort of like stability, like, hey, we're going to have this version, we're going to support this version. So with that would be just something else, which I commented in the issue. We should figure out if the GitHub runners are actually suitable for that or not. But
Beth left a comment just now saying, I think in the chat here saying, I think one of the challenges we've seen with GitHub Actions is things change underneath us. Yeah. So that might be a comment worth leaving in the issue, perhaps, I don't know, but something for the build and release folks to think about, I guess. And yeah, I mean, if nothing else, it's an indication that, there's a new collaborator and they see the duration of time that it takes for GitHub Actions to complete as a inconvenience at a minimum. And maybe it's pain that some of us have all just gotten used to, perhaps.
The other thing I'll just say is, I guess if I got that right, who knows, has volunteered to help with the build repo. So and I asked if he was interested in the Mac OS stuff. So we are discussing how we get him access so we could help with the Jenkins machines as well. So. possibly he can help solve that problem. Okay, so let's move on. The next issue is 45335, which is async hooks add migration note. I'm guessing, Jeffrey, you added that to the agenda.
Yeah. So there was a very old thread under node.js/diagnostics about started in 2018 about what are the criteria for async hooks to become stable. And because async hooks is an experimental API, and it's basically never going to become stable. It's more than 4 years old. I'm not sure exactly how old it is, and it's kind of obscure. Like there aren't that many user apps that probably use it directly, but it's used indirectly, most prominently through instrumentation libraries. Although not all of them, apparently. Like some of them have migrated to newer APIs. Anyway, that thread had very intermittent discussion over the last few years. Our attention was drawn to async hooks more recently this summer as I was trying to debug that issue with ESM with it, and so it got more people focused on it. And basically the async hooks like fires off callbacks for all async activity, including internal node async activity. In the ESM case, there's async activity for every module that you load because that's just the nature of ESM. So there's a lot more events firing when your code is in ESM versus CommonJS. This is what was causing a lot of the async hooks tests to fail, because they just assume that like code is synchronous. So anyway, we've been looking into this and trying to figure out like, okay, how are we going to like deal with async hooks in an ESM world, and how does this impact the ESM migration? And I went back to Stephen Bellinger, who's one of, if not the primary author of async hooks, and I was like, hey, what's going on with this? What are we thinking about this API? I see this, 4-year-old issue asking if it should become stable, and he's like, oh yeah, it's never going to become stable. We've, since that issue was open, we've basically reached the conclusion that we want to deprecate it, eventually get rid of it. We don't know how soon or when or how or if, because it's so old at this point and possibly entrenched. If we may never be able to get rid of it. But anyway, there seemed to be consensus that if it were possible, they would definitely like to get rid of it. And there's definitely consensus that they want everyone to stop using it. The only kind of point of contention is, should we just accept that it's never going to get removed because it's been with us for so long, and therefore, run with that, like call it legacy or something, and treat it as de facto supported forever? Or should we actually try to, remove it eventually? There is sort of a possible third case, which is we tell everyone that we want to remove it, and maybe we never do, but telling everyone we want to remove it serves the goal of trying to push everyone off of it to the more modern APIs. So anyway, since that old thread seemed to reach a consensus of at least updating the docs to say that this will be removed, I opened a PR with just adding like one sentence to do that. And there were objections to that PR that some people think, I think Matteo in particular thinks, oh, we're never going to remove it. To which I was like, that very well may be. That doesn't mean we can't say that in the docs, because like ultimately what we really want right now is for people to stop using it, regardless of whether or not we ever remove it. The most important people that we want to stop using it are instrumentation vendors. So if they feel like they can't rely on it, that it could go away, or maybe disappear behind a flag or something like that, then they will migrate off of it. That will serve our purpose. Because like, if some random NPM module still uses it, doesn't matter so much, as long as the big instrumentation libraries that people use in production have all migrated off of it, then we're safe from like an ESM migration standpoint. So that's why I wanted to put that label in the docs, regardless of whatever actually happens in the future.
So I see Rich has his hand up. You're on mute if you're talking, Rich.
Thank you. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I'm off mute now. Excellent. So Jeffrey, that's great context. What is what is your hope for outcome today? Like, what do you want the TSC to do today? Like, is there a decision made?
Is Mateo on? No. I mean, I just like to land that PR. Mateo has a block on it. There's a user Flarna who
Gerhard, yeah.
also, what's his name? Gerhard?
Gerhard.
Who objects to saying that it will be removed. His phrase, his preferred phrasing is something like, you know, it will never become stable or something like that, without saying whether or not it'll be removed. But he completely agrees. Like, he wrote a long PR of suggestions for, you know, basically a migration path. Like, you could show this or try that, or, you know, be aware of this, blah, blah, blah. Which I approved. So it's sort of just a kind of a question of, like, what do we want to say about the status of, I mean, I was assuming we wouldn't change the experimental status. Yes, we could potentially call it legacy, but I feel like that's tantamount to saying that it'll never get removed. So I was thinking of leaving the status as experimental, but just adding a note that it will be removed. And then if we really want to, if that's not enough in terms of pushing, you know, prominent packages to migrate off of it, we could even add like a warning that gets printed, like an experimental warning. If we really want to be pushy, we could like put it behind a flag. But the goal is just to get the important production packages to stop using this API. And I feel like adding this sentence is the best way to, or at least the simplest way to start doing that. If anyone has a better idea to achieve that goal, then I'm open, but I don't see what goal is achieved by saying something wishy-washy like this may be removed or this won't become stable or something like that.
Rich, your hand's up again.
Yeah. So I have a feeling that we're not going. Well, for one thing, we don't have a majority of the TSC here, but I have a feeling we're not going to be comfortable making a decision on this without Mateo here, is my guess. I wonder if the path forward for you on this is to leave the TSC agenda label on this, work with Flarna Gerhardt to get his PR landed, because my impression.
I've already approved his PR, so
Right.
it should be ready whenever it gets through. So it's
Whatever
really
else
just a question of we just took out the text on the status because
So
we
yeah,
don't
so
need
I
two
guess
PRs
so maybe the
for
thing
one sentence.
maybe the thing to do is land that PR and circle back to this after that PR lands. Yeah, I mean, because I just don't see. I mean, I agree with you that I think there should be. I think that adding, you know, and much like you say, like, I kind of don't mostly care what the text actually says. I just, other than please don't use this. You know, so if you don't have to.
I mean, it has to be forceful enough that a company feels like they need to prioritize this,
and it has to be concise enough and prominent enough that people will see it and read it and understand it. But yeah, I
could do the printed warning instead.
But here's the thing: we
can
go back and forth on this, and it's I don't think it's going to matter because, like I said, I don't think we're going to make a decision on this without Mateo here. I just don't think, you know. And correct me if I'm wrong, everyone else, if you feel like we're going to vote to override the objection here. I did want to see what the objection said because I thought maybe he backtracked a bit, but maybe not. Anyway, yeah, here it is.
I mean, I think our choice today is to like either move for a formal vote and then like have like, here's the choices of the text, or go back and spend some more time with Mateo to see if he's likely to, like, if there's consensus to be found, right?
Well, so yeah, Jeffrey, if you want to move for a vote, I'll second that. And then unless somebody else feels like we shouldn't do it, we'll just do a vote. And Mateo, you know, yeah. And I
mean, maybe before we go straight to that, is there anyone else who doesn't think we should put this text? I mean, anyone else who agrees with Mateo, essentially, who's on this call?
I'm fine with the text you have, but I know that Mateo over time has been felt quite strongly that it should be like that we'll never actually remove it. So
Yeah, and that's fine. Like, we don't have
Yeah.
to say we're going to remove it. We just have to tell people not to use it.
yep. No, so I agree. So I guess I should have just said, no, I'm happy with the text you have there. But I know that other people aren't.
Yeah, I don't want to overrule Mateo without him being here. Are we gonna change the schedule in this call? Because I can't really make the like early morning ones, which should be next week. So this would be like them bumping it for 2 weeks.
Well,
Well,
yeah,
I was just gonna say, like, why not? Sorry.
It's going to be bumped for 2 weeks anyway, because if we like, I've been running the we have 19 of 21 people who have filled out the spreadsheet. So I've been running the numbers a bit to just sort of see what times are likely to come up, and the early meeting is likely to now be 1 a.m. in Pacific time. So either way, you and I are both likely to not make the next meeting. So
I thought
Yeah.
the last time I looked at the numbers, there was like, it was something around 8, I think it was 8 a.m. Pacific was
yeah,
like
that's in there
4 or
too.
5s for every single person. So it's kind of
No.
like, well, why don't we just like
No, that's not. No, that
not
is.
anymore?
And probably, I mean, I don't think ever, but
When I looked at it a few weeks ago, I could find it in Slack. When I looked at it a few weeks ago, that was the case.
So I
Like, I
think
was-
that might be a slight diversion.
Anyway, we could talk this
What
later.
what I was trying to say
Right.
is, like, it might make sense, Jeffrey, if you just have like a direct discussion with Mateo to see if there's like some middle ground. Otherwise, like something like this, we could do through an async vote, right? Like,
yeah.
I'm just wondering, do we need to force this into a meeting? Like, this is just
No.
something that says we got three.
Well, I
we got
mean,
three lines.
does anyone else have any objections or feedback? Because I'd love to hear it before, if everyone else is like okay with whatever gets decided, then that's fine. I just need to talk to Mateo. But if anyone else has anything, then I'd love to hear it and can take that into account.
And I think that if we do an async vote, it can like, there's no rush. It can be like a 2-week long vote, so that we can have conversation and stuff. If we, but anyway.
So I guess my only other question is, like, I'll reach out to Mateo then and just try to reach some compromise with him. And then what about Gerhard? Like let's say I convince Mateo to just accept the text as is. Then how do we feel about Gerhard? We just tell him like, oh, it's a decision of the TSC, or is there a better way to handle this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that conversation has to involve the collaborators involved, and that would be Gerhard and Mateo and
Steven.
And yeah, and I think it might be hard to get everybody on the same page, but we want to try to do that, and if we can't, then then we vote, and it's just like yes or no, are we doing this or not? And
well, and I think that, like, if there's a couple of objections and 3 possible choices, we can list those in the vote, right? And then whatever the outcome of the vote is what we end up going with.
I'll let Antoine speak to how things work when we have more than 2 options, but yes, basically.
I think it's on the TSC charter. We should use the, what is it called again? Well, we have a system.
It's Condorcet or whatever. It's like each person can express their order.
I was just joking, and I was just using it as an opportunity to make Antoine say something, because everybody's quiet and I'm dominating conversation along with Michael and Jeffrey, and nobody else is saying anything, and we have like 7 other people on this call. So,
but I think I'd sum up as, like, I think, Jeffrey, the 3 people who are like, it's great you've asked everybody here, but it doesn't sound like anybody else has like the super strong. So if you can talk to the 3 people seem to have the strongest feelings, see
Sure.
if there's a consensus.
I can spearhead this. I guess my only other question for the larger group, and you can get back to me async if you want, is there any other context about async hooks I should be aware of? Like, I know about this instrumentation case, but like, if we actually go through with removing it someday, whenever that day may come, are there other like important populations or use cases that I should be aware of? So
Well,
That's
I
it.
mean, I know Brian's been trying to find that, like he's opened issues saying, hey, here are the key use cases and publicizing that. And I don't think we're aware of anything outside of the people who've
So
responded to those.
yeah, that's probably the other thing I should mention is that since the June summit, I've been talking to Stephen and Brian English about, hey, can you get me like any blockers to doing instrumentation for ESM? And in particular, tell me if you're using async hooks and what for, and like, why can't you migrate off of it? And months have gone by and they just like haven't written that up. So that was kind of my other motivation for like wanting to kind of prod them a little bit, because it's like, I understand how companies work. If they don't need to do something, then they won't. It doesn't satisfy a user, commercial demand. So they need to kind of feel pressured into it. So that's what I'm trying to do here. And if people have ideas for better ways to apply gentle pressure, then let me know. So, all right, that's it.
Okay, so I'm just gonna, Jeffrey will see if there is consensus, otherwise propose async vote. Okay.
I do think this should go to a vote rather than just being like, oh, we don't have consensus, the status quo stands, because I feel like
You can always call for a vote.
Yeah,
like
Yeah.
the status
Nobody-
quo is its own option. Like choosing to just ignore this is
Yeah.
I feel like we should affirmatively have to do that rather than just default into it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
If there are objections and there are people who are who endorse it, and neither side wants to back down, you can a vote is absolutely 100% appropriate.
Okay.
okay, so let's move on to the next issue, which is 45223. This is the Node.js threat model. I think in terms of it was on the agenda as an FYI. There is still some discussion in the agenda as well, and just I guess I'll just urge people from the TSC to look at it and comment, and we'll go from there. On agenda for awareness, please review comments. Deps, the next one is 45127, Deps vendor December. This one, I wonder if it should be taken off the agenda, because it was, maybe I'm wrong, but like I thought last time we talked about it, it was like, hey, let's talk about the other one, which had to do with like an update checker. And I don't see that update checker one on the agenda anymore.
So some people like commented on the version checker PR saying basically like, oh, we don't think we're going to be able to land this, but thanks so much for suggesting it, blah, blah, blah. So with that, and he seemed to just drop it. And so with that, I'm not sure. I mean, I think there's like definitely arguments for vendoring Semver regardless of that other feature. It just means we don't necessarily have like something that we need it for.
So it was James who added this to the agenda, and he says it's for discussion. I'm not really sure. Like, I don't know if this is a great place for discussion unless we're discussing to try to make a decision, but yeah.
Maybe we leave on the agenda until we have James at a meeting to.
Yeah, and I'll leave a comment. I'll leave a comment just saying we didn't know what to do.
Why don't we maybe take the agenda label off, and then it's like just leave a comment saying like when you put the agenda label back on, please state whatever question you want decided.
Totally, I'll do that.
Okay, so Rich will comment and we'll remove agenda item for now. Okay, sounds good. The next one is inclusion in winter CG runtimes key proposal number 166. I think Antoine, you added that to the agenda.
Yeah, so it's actually Ethan who tagged the TSC on it. So I guess the winter CG is making up a list of runtimes. Node.js has to claim one string that represent node. So currently it's node, like the binary, like the name of the binary. And I guess we just need the TSC to have consensus on it. And yeah, that's
Sounds good to me.
all there is. Yeah.
Any concerns? Otherwise, like I can record in the minutes that there are no objections from those present.
Yeah, you might want to make a note that Ruben's not here, so it's 9 of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I should say minus Ruben who left early.
Something like that, yeah.
Okay.
And I'll throw that, I'll throw it in there in the issue too. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. The next one is 129.
And I'll remove the, I'm sorry, I'll remove the label as well from that.
Okay,
I think
perfect.
I think the issue can even be closed if there's TSC consensus.
Okay, I'll do that too. And I'll just leave a note saying reopen if I'm wrong.
That's good.
Okay, so the next one is number 1299, experimental features, security expectations. I do know we had some discussion of this last time. There's been some ongoing discussion in the issue. Rich, I don't know if you wanted to, do you have any things you wanted to add or?
I'm sorry, I'm writing up that last comment.
Yeah, sure, okay.
Wait, this is the experimental features.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Oh yeah, so this, okay, yeah, so this is well, you know all about this, as does Beth and Danielle. But we were trying to figure out, because how we should deal with HackerOne reports, for example, about security vulnerabilities in experimental features. And there's on the one hand, oh, they're experimental, we don't need to issue CVEs, we don't need to handle them in security releases. But on the other hand, some of the experimental features are in fact security features. And so, like there's a bit of a paradox that people really do need to be able to rely on them. So, I mean, my proposal is just to treat defects in existing experimental security features the same as all other security defects. Breaking changes or removing the feature are acceptable fixes because they're experimental. So, there's a little bit of additional flexibility, but, we should do that. The concern, I think primarily voiced by Matteo, is that we'll get like a flood of people reporting issues in experimental features, half-baked features or whatever. And but I just don't think that's going to happen. But I propose that we just make this decision to do this, to treat experimental features, security vulnerabilities in experimental features as seriously as we treat them in stable APIs, and just do that for 6 months, which would put us into May of 2023. And at that point, revisit and be like, okay, is this working for us or is this causing problems? And in the meantime, we should, of course, be very cautious about what we release as experimental features to make sure that, both in implementation and in design, the experimental features are not being reckless with security or negligent or whatever, making errors that we will regret. So that's my 2-part proposal. And
I just
go ahead.
sorry, I just have one thing to add once you're done.
I am done. Go for it.
Okay. I mean, the additional context, which I remember from past, summits and discussions, is that like there's some people who would basically say some of these features you will never make them secure. But the consensus we did have is that they are good. Like they may be a bit like seatbelts, where like they're never going to be secure, but like they're still better. Like they help and they're better than nothing. So it's good to, and maybe we'll be wrong about them not being able to be secure. So it's good to let people experiment with them. But it's kind of like the only reason they got in there is because they were experimental. And I think it gets down that slippery slope. If you treat them then exactly the same as everything else, you could get that flood. Having said that, I'm not arguing.
Then we pull them out of Node forever. It's no problem.
So I'm not arguing against your proposal. My only remaining comments were like, let's be very careful about what we say we're committing to, so that we don't send the impression that like, hey, yeah, we'll treat them the same forever. If the only commitment right now is for 6 months, right?
Oh, right. Yeah. I remember your comment along those lines. Beth has her hand up. What do you have to say, Beth?
Yeah, so the one thing in that thread I kind of objected to was, I think that at one point it was mentioned to just fix any security related issues related to security experimental features in public. And I get the analogy of like a seatbelt, but I think that would actually put people in a worse state for using a security feature, which would then, what's the incentive to use an experimental security feature if we're then going to put people at even more risk by publicly, disclosing them in advance? So that was the only objection I had in that thread specifically.
I mean, it might be a case for not releasing security features as experimental, but that means, that makes it a high bar to introduce security features. And I'm thinking out loud. I'm going to stop. Thank you, Beth.
But yeah, I agree with that. I think under Rich's current proposal, we could come up with whatever others, but under the current proposal, we would keep them private. So I think that does at least address that concern.
Yep.
I think we can kind of handle this asymmetrically, that we don't necessarily make the same security guarantees for experimental features as we do for regular features, but that we do treat reports about actual vulnerabilities just as seriously as vulnerabilities in any other part of Node, if people can reasonably expect a feature to be a secure feature, which I guess for most of the features we are talking about is true. So let's say the quick implementation, for example, I believe has been mentioned in that thread, which is a huge piece of code and no one expects it to be 100% bug-free when we land this, because no matter how long we take reviewing it, it's still a bunch of C++ code and incredible complexity. So we should definitely treat security vulnerabilities in that part of code seriously, in my opinion. But at the same time, we should be very clear about the status of the code, even when it is merged, that we cannot make the same security guarantees as for other established features.
Would you be willing to put that comment in writing once I finish my comment in the issue, saying that, I would,
Sure.
I think there's nuance in there that I will mess up, and I would prefer that you.
Sure. And if we do get a flood of reports about experimental features, it might be feedback that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So I think there might be some positive aspect to getting more feedback on experimental features, especially if it's security related.
Yeah, I personally agree from the perspective of like, if we can get feedback, that's definitely good, as long as it doesn't drive us into the ground trying to handle it, right? So I think finding a way that we get that feedback, but we handle it in a way where it's manageable is the goal. And what Rich has seems like a perfectly reasonable way to start out. So I think in terms of being on the agenda, is there any question or something more that we need to answer in terms or discuss in terms of the issue? mean, my one remaining comment is just, or concern is just like how we document what we're agreeing to do here, as opposed to, so that we don't say in 6 months, change your mind, and everybody's like, well, wait a sec, I only used that because you said that you were going to treat them just like any other thing.
I'm putting up something like that. I'm mentioning that in the comment I'm typing. I think we're good.
Okay, so it sounds like you're going to comment on the issue with the feedback so far. Should we leave it on the agenda or do you think we've covered
No,
it?
I'll take it off.
Okay. Rich will add comment based on discussion. Will remove agenda tag. Okay, the next one then is Crowd in Docs update number 714. I think, Rich, did you add that one once you're finished? I'll take a look while you're typing, but
Yeah, that one's me. I'm 99% sure. Let me see. Yeah. So all right. So this is very, very similar to the website redesign in that it's a thing that had some momentum with a bunch of people who weren't otherwise that deeply involved in Node Core for a while, and then kind of died out. And now it's this like thing that's sitting out there that we need to either like get rid of or invest in and finish. And I think it's up to the TSC to do these things. I had actually put out a sort of like a call on the in the TSC Slack channel, I think, saying, hey, anybody want to do this? And I think Darshan and Danielle both replied, and I was talking about both Crowd-in and the website redesign. So but I want to know if anybody else is interested in like investing time and effort in getting our Crowd-in instance working again. I'm happy to like meet with Danielle and or Darshan and try to just, do knowledge transfer, and try to get it done. But I would really like to see more engagement on the TSC on these issues. And if we're not going to see that, I wonder how sustainable they are. Website redesign at least has the advantage of being something that theoretically can be brought to a close. But ongoing Crowd-in translations of our API docs does not fit that description. And we need to actually commit to it. So I don't know what outcome I'm looking for, but that's the context. And maybe I need to write something up, or I don't know, but I'm going to stop talking now in case someone wants to raise their hand or say something.
I'm kind of on the same thought process of you, like it needs to be sustainable enough to keep it going. I know there is some work being done in terms of like our API docs and the infrastructure, which there's collaborators quite keen and working on that. But I suspect like translation would come out of the back end of that later on. I guess my question is like, if we just shut it down, what does it mean when we come back? And sorry, I see Danielle has her hand up, so I'll let her jump in.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it seems like only Rich has context to like make any decisions at this point. So that's why I volunteered. I can like look at it and maybe see if it's like maybe lay out some options. Do we want to keep maintaining this? Is like what's the level of effort? If like there's a specific amount of like TSC members that need to be involved or something, and just figure out maybe like some paths forward, and then, I don't know, maybe we can vote on it or whatever. All
That sounds good to me.
right, cool.
So I see Beth said, have we explored if the foundation can support translations at all in some way or give us funding for it to happen? That is not something I have explored, but it is something we can bring that up.
I guess the fundamental question back too is like, how strategic do we think having translated documents is, right? If that's super strategic,
Well, I mean, we
then
can't make that decision without knowing how much effort is involved. Like it used to just happen and we didn't know, it was just happening on
Right.
craft, and people went there and read, provided translations. Other people came along and read the translations and improved them. And so, like, of course we want all our documentation translated if we can do it at no cost and no effort on our part. Of course we want that, right? But I don't know how much effort it is to keep running this thing. I keep poking at it, but not really finding the time to really actually, really get in the weeds on it. And I should, or somebody should. So I'm gonna schedule that one-on-one with Danielle. If nothing else, it will probably encourage me to like actually gather all the information into one place so that people can wrap their heads around it a little bit. But I don't know that we need to discuss this much more at this point. Although if someone else has something they want to say, please do.
no, okay, so let's move on to strategic initiatives, which is the last thing on the agenda. Antoine, anything on?
No, there's stable fetch.
Oh, sorry, but yeah, Matteo mentioned that didn't need to be discussed.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Antoine, anything on the core promise APIs this week?
Not this week.
Okay, on next 10, just the update is we're working on capturing the updates from the summit and a related summary, a survey. That's taking a little longer than we thought. I guess Joyi, anything on startup performance?
Not much, just more progress in making sure that context can be snapshotted via contexts.
So sorry, you're working on making sure that
We supporting VN context in the startup snapshot.
okay. Snapshot, and I'm looking to see if we have anybody else for any of the other ones. I don't think so. So that takes us to the end of the agenda. If people can stick around for the private session, is there anything else we should chat before we close out the public session?
Probably should have mentioned this in the announcements, but we'll hopefully by next week have new meeting times now that daylight savings has ended in North America and Europe. So yeah, just be aware that next week's meeting, or if not next week's meeting, certainly the week after that will probably be at a different time than the schedule says right now.
Okay, thanks for letting everybody know. Thanks everybody who's watching on the live stream, and we will see you in GitHub and next time. Oops. Sorry.